Humanity is officially at war, declared the council. She only smiled and said finally. The chamber was built to make you feel like nothing. I knew that the moment I walked in. The ceiling climbed 40 meters above the floor, carved from black stone that shimmered with faint blue light, like something trapped inside it was still trying to breathe. The walls curved inward at the top, meeting at a point that caught every sound and threw it back at you from a different direction. Your own footsteps betrayed you in here. They echoed twice, so every time you took a step it sounded like someone was following you. 300 seats arranged in a perfect semicircle, rising in tiers like a coliseum. And every seat was filled. I was the only human in the room. My name is Yara Solis. I am 39 years old. I hold the rank of commander in the United Earth Fleet, and for the past 11 minutes I have been walking across the floor of the Galactic Sovereignty Council's Grand Chamber, alone, with no escort, no bodyguard, and no weapon. The Council had insisted on that last condition. I had agreed without any hesitation, because the condition that mattered was not what I carried in my hands. The delegates watched me walk. I had studied every species in that room before I arrived. The Varek, tall and gray, with 4 lidless eyes that tracked movement like cameras on a swivel. The Charan, squat and rust-colored, who communicated partially through vibrations in their chest plates that their translator implants converted into speech. The Lorith, who looked nearly human from a distance and profoundly wrong up close, their proportions just slightly off in ways the human brain refused to stop noticing. They were powerful. Every civilization in this chamber had been traveling between stars while humanity was still drawing maps of the ocean. They were also, every single one of them, waiting for me to show fear. I did not give them that. I reached the podium at the center of the floor. It was sized for a Varek, which meant it came up to my chest. I did not adjust it. I put both hands flat on its surface and looked up at the high speaker, a Varek named Counselor Vrath, who sat at the apex of the semicircle in a chair that was more like a throne. Vrath leaned forward. His 4 eyes fixed on me with a steadiness that was meant to unsettle. It did not. He spoke. The translator implant behind my right ear converted the sounds into English with perfect, eerie clarity. Commander Yara Solis. Representative of the human collective. The Galactic Sovereignty Council has deliberated for 61 days regarding the status of human expansion into the Outer Rim territories. We have reviewed your fleet strength, your population data, your resource projections, and your military capability assessments. We have done so with patience and with fairness. He paused. The pause was theatrical. It was the kind of pause that preceded a sentence designed to land like a stone dropped from a great height. The Council's conclusion is this. Humanity is a young species. Aggressive. Unstable. A danger not only to yourselves but to the balance of civilized space. You have been warned twice before. You have failed to comply. Today, the Council issues its final ultimatum. You will surrender all Outer Rim colony claims. You will reduce your fleet to 40 vessels, to be monitored by Council observers. You will accept a governance partnership, administered by the Council, for a period of no less than 200 standard years. In return, your species will not be removed from the Galactic Register. The room was absolutely still. Removed from the Galactic Register. That was the diplomatic way of saying something that needed no diplomatic packaging. Every camera in the Council chamber was transmitting. Every species in known space was watching this feed. Billions of eyes on one human woman standing at a podium designed for a much taller creature, receiving a threat dressed up as an offer. I had been told to beg. The Earth government's advisory panel had given me a carefully prepared statement of humility and compliance, designed to buy time. Senator Harold Cole had personally asked me to read it. He had used the word please. I had left the statement on my desk back on Earth. I let the silence sit for 4 full seconds. 4 seconds is a long time in a room that quiet. I counted them deliberately. Then I smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a polite diplomatic smile. A real one, slow and certain, the kind that comes from somewhere deep in the chest when something you have been waiting for a very long time finally arrives. The translator implants across the chamber worked furiously. A smile, on a human face, in response to an extinction ultimatum. The cultural analysis protocols were cycling through possibilities. They had no framework for it. The Charan delegates shifted in their seats. Two of the Lorith exchanged a glance. I said one word. Finally. The word hit the chamber the way a stone hits still water. It spread outward in silence. Several delegates leaned toward their advisors. The translation was accurate, they were being told. The word meant what they thought it meant. Councillor Vratha's four eyes narrowed in sequence, left to right. Commander Solis, he said carefully, do you require a restatement of the Council's terms? No, I said. I understood them clearly. All of them. I decline all of them. The murmur that moved through the chamber was not quite noise. It was more like pressure. You decline, Vrath repeated, as though testing the word for structural integrity. I decline, I confirmed. On behalf of United Earth and all human settlements in the Outer Rim. I further invoke Article 0 of the Human Charter, which I will be happy to provide to the Council in full. It is a short document. It has only one line. Vrath said nothing. No one said anything. I had their complete attention, and that attention had shifted in quality, quietly, from contempt to something more careful. Article 0 states, I said, that no human government, commander, or delegate is authorized to surrender the sovereignty or freedom of the human species under any condition or under pressure of any kind. It cannot be overruled. It cannot be suspended. It was written by the first generation of the United Earth Charter specifically because we knew this day would come. Another beat of silence. The Council's ultimatum is declined. The threat accompanying it is noted. Humanity's response to both will follow through the appropriate channels. I lifted my hands from the podium. Thank you for your time. I turned and walked back toward the chamber entrance. No one stopped me. I think some of them genuinely did not know what to do. In 17 civilizations worth of diplomatic history, no one had ever declined an ultimatum from this chamber and then simply turned and left. My footsteps echoed twice, as always. The second echo followed the first like a shadow. I was almost at the door when Vrath found his voice. Commander Solis. Humanity cannot win this war. I stopped. Not because the words frightened me. I stopped because the answer deserved to be delivered without rushing. I looked back over my shoulder. Counselor, I said, you have been watching us for 30 years. In all that time, did it ever occur to you to ask why we were not afraid? I did not wait for his answer. The door opened, and I walked out into a corridor that felt, after 40 meters of alien stone and blue light, like something close to normal. Lieutenant Darrow was waiting at the end of the corridor with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that was trying very hard to look calm. How did it go? He asked. About as planned, I said, and took the coffee. Behind us, faintly through the sealed chamber doors, we could hear the session erupting into chaos. I took a sip. It tasted like the beginning of something. 3 days later I was standing in the command center of the United Earth Fleet flagship and looking at a map that the Council did not know existed. The room hummed around me. The flagship was called the Forward Line, a name that had seemed poetic to whoever chose it and now felt almost funny, given what I was about to show my senior officers. Lieutenant Darrow stood to my left. Navigation Chief Claire Barton stood to my right, her arms crossed, her expression the particular kind of neutral that she wore when she was working very hard not to look surprised. Science Officer Felix Grant leaned against the far wall with his coffee, already on his 3rd cup of the morning, watching the holographic display with the focused calm of a man who had already run these numbers so many times that they had become familiar friends. Behind them stood the rest of my senior staff. 12 people. Every one of them had been read into the program at different times over the past 7 years. Every one of them had signed a classification agreement that would have made even a seasoned intelligence officer uncomfortable. And every one of them had kept the secret, completely, for the entire duration. I pressed a command on the panel in front of me and the display shifted. The Council's intelligence assessment of the United Earth Fleet showed 52 warships. That assessment had taken the Council's best analysts 4 years to compile. It was thorough, well-sourced, and almost entirely wrong. The map now showed 4,709 vessels. Claire Barton said nothing. She had known for 3 years. But seeing the full number always did something to a person's face. Darrow exhaled through his nose, very quietly. He had known even longer. The newer members of the senior staff were less restrained. Lieutenant Commander Oliver Nash pressed his lips together and looked at me with an expression that had a question in it but had not yet decided how to phrase the question. "Where?" said Felix Grant, simply. "The asteroid belt," I said. "Primarily. 17 construction sites operating under full electromagnetic shielding, timed to the natural radiation cycles of the belt so that Council surveillance reads only background noise. 8 additional sites in the gas cloud along the outer rim's eastern corridor, using the same principle. 2 sites on the dark side of moons that Council mapping has listed as geologically inactive." "For how long?" Nash asked. "The first site opened 28 years ago," I said. Nash looked at the number on the display again. 4,709. Then he looked at me. "The sleeper doctrine," I said. "That is what we call it internally. 30 years ago, the founders of the United Earth Charter looked at the trajectory of our relationship with the Council and concluded that an ultimatum like the one I just received was not a possibility. It was a certainty. And they made a decision that I think is the most important decision any group of humans has ever made." I moved to the second panel and pulled up a document. Plain text, nothing visual. Old language, precise and dry. They decided not to hope the war wouldn't come. They decided to prepare for it as if it was already scheduled. Every budget allocation, every technological development program, every diplomatic stall and every treaty negotiation for 30 years has served a secondary purpose that the Council never detected. Every time we signed an agreement limiting our fleet size, we were signing with one hand and building with the other, in places they couldn't see. "They never suspected?" Barton asked. "They suspected us of being emotional and disorganized," I said. "Which we deliberately encouraged them to believe. We are very good at appearing to be exactly what other people expect us to be." That got a small reaction from the room. Not quite laughter. Something more contained than that. "Intelligence intercepts from the past 72 hours, I continued, moving to the third panel. The display populated with translated Council communications, flagged and sorted. The Council Security Bureau has filed 17 separate assessments of my behavior in the chamber. The most common conclusion across all 17 is that I exhibit signs of psychological instability." Felix Grant raised his coffee cup slightly. "I will take psychological instability over predictability every time." "They think my smile was a malfunction," I said. "They have no cultural reference for a species that has been preparing for a war smiling when the war is finally declared. To them, the appropriate response to an ultimatum is panic, or submission, or anger. A genuine smile is outside their modeled parameters." Nash had settled into a chair and was studying the fleet display with the concentration of a man doing very fast arithmetic. 4,709 ships. What is their readiness status? 83% at full combat readiness. The remaining 17% are within 48 hours of full readiness. The ones furthest from readiness are the largest vessels. The Council's models predicted that any human force capable of sustained conflict would need at least 6 months to mobilize from a standing position. I let that sit for a moment. "We mobilized 3 weeks ago." The room was quiet in a specific way. The kind of quiet that settles when a very large thing becomes real. "There is something else," I said. "And this is the part one want you to understand, not as officers, but as humans. The Council has studied us for 30 years. They have reviewed our history, our psychology, our conflict patterns. And in all of that study, they made one consistent error." I paused. "They looked at our history of violence and concluded that we are dangerous because we like to fight. They were wrong. We are dangerous because we hate to lose. Those are not the same thing. Every civilization in the Council fights to win. They have clear objectives, defined endpoints, cost thresholds. When the cost of winning exceeds a certain value, they stop. They negotiate. They accept outcomes." I looked at the fleet display. 4,709 ships, built in the dark over 28 years by a species that had been told, quietly and consistently, that it was not welcome at the table. "We don't stop," I said. "We adjust. We absorb. We find a different way forward, and we keep moving. The Council believes that if they hit us hard enough and fast enough, we will calculate that resistance is no longer rational. They are going to discover that humans do not respond to that calculation the way they expect. Oliver Nash was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do they have coming at us?" I pulled up the fourth panel. The Council strike force was already assembled at their staging position, 12 light hours from the outer rim's edge. It was an impressive force by any measure. 240 warships, 3 carrier-class vessels, a full logistics train. The Council's intelligence suggested that a force of this size would be roughly twice what any human response could match, I said. They modeled for our 52 known vessels plus an estimated 30 to 40 additional ships they suspected we might have hidden. I closed the panel. I planned for a force 3 times this size, I said. We are more than ready. Claire Barton turned and looked at the main display one more time. The map of human ships, spread across the dark in a pattern that no Council satellite had ever resolved clearly enough to count. "Commander," she said quietly, "you know what this means. Once we engage, there is no version of this where the galaxy looks at us the same way again." "I know," I said. "Good," she said. And her tone was not grim. It was something steadier than that. 12 hours later, the Council's strike force crossed the outer rim boundary. We were already waiting. What happened next the galaxy would spend years arguing over, studying, and retelling. Historians would give it a name. Analysts would write papers. The Council would commission investigations into how their models had failed so completely. I will simply tell you what it looked like from where I stood. It looked like 30 years of quiet work, paying off exactly on schedule. We moved to our positions before their sensors resolved us clearly. By the time their commanders understood the scale of what they were facing, the first engagement had already begun and the terms of it had already been set by us, not by them. Darrow stood at the station to my left. Barton had navigation. Grant had weapons coordination. Nash was managing the fleet communication grid. "Contact in 90 seconds, Barton said, her voice even. I put my hands behind my back and watched the display. "Let them come," I said. They came. And for the first time in 3 decades of waiting, we answered. The first engagement lasted 19 hours. The Council strike force had entered the outer rim boundary expecting resistance they could measure and manage. What they found instead was a grid of human ships that did not behave the way ships were supposed to behave. Council naval doctrine, across all 17 member civilizations, followed a principle called the central line. You identified the enemy's strongest point, you applied maximum force to it, you broke it, and the rest of the formation collapsed around the break. It had worked for them across 200 years of conflict, against 11 different species, in 47 documented engagements. It did not work on us. The reason it did not work was something I had written into our tactical framework 7 years earlier, after reading every Council military engagement on record. Their doctrine assumed a fixed center. It assumed that a fleet had a heart, a point of maximum strategic value, and that once you found it and attacked it, the fleet would respond by defending it. We had no center. Our formation was a fluid grid, distributed across a volume of space 3 times larger than Council doctrine said a fleet our size could effectively cover. Every ship in the grid had 3 primary assignments and 7 contingency assignments, and the command to shift between them could be given and executed in under 4 minutes. When the Council force hit what looked like our central cluster, the cluster dissolved laterally, drew the attack inward, and closed from 3 directions simultaneously. The Council commander, a Charan admiral named Grathkes, reacted well. He was not a poor officer. He pulled his force back, reformed, and tried a different angle. We adjusted. He tried again. We adjusted again. By hour 6, Admiral Grathkes had tried 9 different approaches. We had countered all 9. Our losses were real. I want to be clear about that. We lost ships. We lost good people. Lieutenant Felix Grant had to stop twice to pull casualty reports because the numbers were coming in faster than the system could organize them. Darrow read the names out loud as they came in, one by one, and I wrote them in my personal log in my own handwriting, because that was the commitment I had made to myself before I ever walked into the Council chamber. Every name, every engagement, every day. Petty Officer Connor Walsh, from the vessel named for the Outer Rim's first surveyor. Navigator Grace Elliott, 26 years old, who had been assigned to her ship for exactly 4 months. Senior Engineer Paul Holt, who had submitted a request for leave 2 weeks ago that I had approved but he had never taken. I wrote them all down. And then I kept working, because that was what they deserved more than grief. They deserved the outcome. By hour 12, Admiral Grathkes opened a private communication channel. It was not a surrender. It was a conversation. Council officers did not surrender in the middle of an engagement. But they did, apparently, ask questions when the questions became urgent enough. The channel opened and his translator came through flat and precise. "Commander Solis," he said. "Your fleet's behavior is not consistent with any modeling we have for human tactical doctrine." "We updated the doctrine," I said. "How long ago?" 7 years. A pause. "Our projections indicated that your fleet, at maximum probable strength, would sustain unrecoverable losses within 70 hours of sustained engagement." "I know," I said. "I read the projection. I found it interesting." Another pause. Longer this time. "You were not afraid," he said, and his tone had shifted. It was not accusatory. It was genuinely curious, in the careful way of a scientist who has encountered a result that does not fit the model and is trying to understand why. "We were afraid," I said, "because it was the truth and I believed in being precise. We are afraid every time. We lose sleep. We worry about the people we are responsible for. Fear is not the issue." "Then what is the issue?" "The issue," I said, "is that fear does not stop us. It informs us. We name it, we account for it, we make our plans around it, and then we move anyway. Your models were built on the assumption that sufficient threat and sufficient loss would produce a rational calculation to stop. That calculation does not override the other one." "What other one?" "The one that says we do not leave our people without an answer." Grathkes was quiet for several seconds. His translator clicked twice, which I had learned meant he was thinking in his native language and had not yet converted the thought. "That is not rational," he said finally. "No," I agreed. "It has worked very well for us anyway." The channel closed. By hour 19, the Council force had withdrawn from 6 of the 12 Ember Line stations. They held the other 6. We held the 6 that mattered more strategically, which I had arranged before the engagement began. The Council force was not defeated. It was repositioning. But the galactic broadcast of the engagement summary, picked up by every monitoring station between the Outer Rim and the Council's core systems, showed something that no Council engagement in 200 years had ever shown. A human fleet had fought the Council to a standstill. Within 48 hours, 2 minor Council member civilizations sent private messages to Earth's diplomatic relay. The messages were carefully worded and carried no formal commitment of any kind. But the meaning was clear. They were watching. They were reassessing. The fracture in the Council coalition, which had been invisible for 30 years, had just become visible. Back aboard the forward line, Darrow found me in the command center 2 hours after the last Council ship cleared the engagement boundary. I was still standing at the main display. The casualty numbers had finalized. The names in my log had reached a total that I did not say out loud. "You should rest," Darrow said. "I know," I said. "Are you going to?" "In a while." He stood next to me and looked at the display. The position of the Council force. The position of our grid. The 6 stations we held, marked in steady blue. "It's going to get harder before it gets easier," he said. "Yes," I said. "You planned for that too, didn't you?" "Yes." He nodded. He did not ask what the plan was. He had learned, over the years we had worked together, that the plan would be revealed in the doing of it, and that worrying about it in advance was a tax on energy that could be spent on something more useful. "The names," he said quietly. "Every one," I said. He pulled out his own notebook. Physical paper, which he had carried since before he joined the fleet. He opened it. I could see, from where I stood, that he had a list of his own. We stood there for a while, both of us quiet, both of us carrying the weight of the engagement in the most human way we knew how. And then we both went back to work. 6 months into the war, I received an invitation I had not asked for. The message came through an encrypted relay that technically did not exist. It used a routing protocol that had been discontinued 4 years earlier and was now employed exclusively by parties who needed to communicate in ways that did not appear on any official record. The sender was listed as Council Administrative Affairs, which was the bureaucratic equivalent of leaving a letter unsigned. The message asked me to attend an emergency session of the Galactic Sovereignty Council. I want to be precise about the word asked. The message used the form of a request. It said we request your presence. It said the Council would appreciate your attendance. It said this matter is of the highest urgency to the stability of the civilized galaxy. What the message was actually saying, underneath the careful language, was this: something has changed, and the people who have the power to change it back do not have the power to change it back without talking to you. I read the message twice, showed it to Darrow, showed it to Claire Barton, and then told both of them to keep it between ourselves. You're going, Barton said. I'm already planning the route, I said. The Council's security architecture for its Grand Chamber had been designed by the Veth Collective, a species widely regarded as among the finest engineers in known space. The Veth did not make mistakes. They did not leave gaps. Their security systems were thorough, layered, and tested continuously against simulated breaches by some of the most capable minds in the galaxy. What the Veth had done, 22 years ago, was license the base structural architecture for their access control system from a human engineering firm in Oslo. The firm's lead designer had retired. The firm itself had been absorbed by a larger company and then dissolved. The documentation of the license was buried in a corporate records archive that nobody checked. The back door was still there. I entered the Council chamber building through a maintenance corridor that the Veth security system registered as cleared, because the access code it was checking against was a human code that the Veth system had never been updated to reject. The chamber was in chaos. Not physical chaos. The delegates were in their seats, all of them, in their formal positions. But the session was the loudest I had ever heard this room. 3 separate factions were arguing simultaneously. The Varek bloc was demanding escalation. The Charin moderates were calling for a ceasefire framework. For member civilizations in the middle were shouting competing procedural motions that nobody was acknowledging. I walked in through the side entrance, crossed the floor, set a data chip on the podium, and stood there. It took 2 full minutes before anyone noticed me. It was one of the Lorith delegates who saw me first. He grabbed the arm of his neighbor, who turned, and then a ripple of attention moved through the room in a wave, tier by tier, until 300 delegates were looking at me in silence. Councillor Vrath stared at me from his elevated position. His 4 eyes moved in sequence, left to right, the way they did when he was running a very fast internal assessment. Commander Solis, he said, and his voice, even through the translator, was doing something careful. You were not invited to this session. I received a message that requested my presence, I said. I am present. That invitation was extended through diplomatic channels. Not through whatever method you used to enter this building. The method I used to enter this building was available because your security system has a human component that was never properly closed out, I said. I would be happy to provide the technical details so you can fix it. I would suggest doing so after we finish talking, since fixing it now would mean I could not leave the same way I came in, which would make this conversation longer than it needs to be. Vratha's eyes held mine for a long moment. What is on that chip? He asked. Humanity's terms, I said. The room shifted. That murmur that I had come to recognize moved through the tiers. Humanity does not set terms, said the head of the Varek bloc, a delegate named High Voice Aerith, from his position 2 tiers above Vrath. His tone was the kind that believed in its own authority completely. High Voice Aerith, I said, looking up at him without any change in my own tone, 6 months ago your assessment was that humanity would not survive the first engagement. 5 months ago, your assessment was that our fleet would be reduced to critical levels within 60 days. 4 months ago, your assessment was that the Ember Line would fall completely within a week. I paused. Would you like to tell me on what basis you are currently making your assessments, so I can understand how much weight to give them? The silence that followed was the specific kind that lands when someone has said something true in a room full of people who would prefer it were not true. Aerith said nothing. Which was, I reflected, the correct response. I picked up the data chip and held it up. What is on this chip is not a surrender. It is not a ceasefire request. It is a proposal called the Autonomy Compact. I will summarize it here, and the full text is on the chip for those who wish to read it. I set the chip back on the podium. Under the Autonomy Compact, humanity ceases all offensive operations within 30 standard days of the compact's signing. In return, the Council recognizes permanent human sovereignty over all current human territories, including all Outer Rim colonies. Council observers are permitted in human space under a defined and limited framework that we propose together. Human representation at this Council becomes full and equal. And in exchange for all of the above, humanity makes one offer. I let that land. The chamber was very still. We will share our shipbuilding technology, I said. Complete schematics. Construction methodology. The engineering principles behind the construction sites you spent 30 years not finding. We built 4,709 warships in secret, in asteroid belts and gas clouds, in 28 years. Consider what we could build in the open, with full resources, without hiding. Consider what we could build together. The silence stretched. Then Aerith said, "This is a deception." "It is a calculation," I said. "The Council has now fought humanity for 6 months. You have lost ground on the Ember Line. 2 of your member civilizations have already signaled privately that they are reassessing their position. The longer this continues, the more expensive it becomes for you and the more normalized it becomes for us. We do not get worn down the way your models predict. Your models predicted we would break at 3 points already, and we have not broken at any of them. You can continue, and the cost will keep rising, and at some point this coalition will fracture fully. Or you can sign the compact, take the technology, and turn what has been a 6-month conflict into the beginning of something more useful." Another long silence. Then Councillor Vrath said, quietly, "And if we refuse?" "Then I leave the chip here," I said, "and we go back to what we were doing, and in another 6 months you will receive another invitation, and the terms on the chip will have changed to reflect what has happened in the intervening time. They will not have changed in your favor." I stepped back from the podium. "I will wait outside for 30 minutes, I said. "If the Council wishes to discuss the compact in private, I will return when summoned. If not, I will return to my fleet." I turned and walked toward the side entrance. Behind me, the chamber did not erupt this time. It did something more significant than that. It began to divide. I could hear it as I walked. The Varek block was loud. But for the first time, the other voices in the room were louder, and there were more of them, and they were not saying the same thing. Dara was outside with coffee. He had gotten very good at being outside with coffee. "How'd it go?" he said. "The chip is on the podium," I said. He handed me the coffee. "Give it 3 hours," I said. "Then we'll know which way it falls." It took 4 hours and 17 minutes. The Council did not vote unanimously. 11 of the 17 member civilizations signed the Autonomy Compact. The remaining 6, led by the Varek hardline bloc, refused and formally abstained from the agreement. It was not a perfect outcome. It was not every civilization at the table. But it was 11 signatures on a document that, 1 year ago, would have seemed impossible. 11 civilizations formally recognizing human sovereignty. 11 sets of observers to be negotiated with rather than authorities to submit to. 11 partners, complicated and imperfect, rather than 11 enemies. The remaining 6 were a problem for another day. And I was very good at planning for other days. I saw Earth from orbit on a Tuesday morning. There is something about that view that no amount of time in space ever makes ordinary. The planet sits in the dark like a thing that shouldn't be possible, blue and white and steady, and the first time you see it after a long absence it does something to the chest that is difficult to name. Not sentiment exactly. Something more fundamental. Something that has no word in English but is present every time. The war, which had officially ended 11 days earlier with the final ratification of the Autonomy Compact by all 11 signing civilizations, had lasted 7 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. It felt longer. I came down through the atmosphere in a standard descent vehicle, nothing ceremonial, and landed at the northern hub outside the government district. There were people waiting. There were always people waiting for something at a moment like this, cameras and officials and organized gatherings with signs. I had expected it and arranged to land 40 minutes after the official schedule said I would. The cameras were still setting up when I walked through the door. Darrow had arranged a car. It was a very ordinary car, which was exactly what I had asked for. We drove through the city without any particular urgency, and I looked out the window at buildings and streets and the specific quality of morning light on Earth that doesn't exist anywhere else. The way it comes in low and golden through gaps between structures. The way ordinary people walk on ordinary streets on an ordinary morning, carrying coffee and bags, talking on devices, completely absorbed in the granular business of their lives, which had not stopped for even a day during 7 months of interstellar war. I found that thought oddly steadying. We went to the government building for the formal sessions. There were handshakes, there were speeches, there was a long briefing about the ongoing implementation of the compact and the status of negotiations with the abstaining civilizations. Senator Harold Cole, who had asked me to read a different statement in the chamber 7 months ago, shook my hand with the particular warmth of a man who had changed his mind about something and was grateful to have been wrong. I was patient through all of it. It was necessary, and I understood that. But the part one had been waiting for was the press session, because of one question. I had known the question was coming. Every journalist who had covered the council chamber broadcast had been building toward it for 7 months. It had been in the frame of every interview request, every written query, every piece of analytical commentary about that moment. They all wanted to understand the same thing. The session was in a large room with high windows. Afternoon light. Several dozen journalists from outlets across Earth and the Outer Rim colonies, plus a delegation of alien correspondents whose species had watched the council chamber broadcast in real time 7 months ago. A journalist named Ellen Vance, from the Earth News Collective, asked it first because she had the floor and she knew exactly what she was doing. "Commander Solis," she said, "when the council read the ultimatum and you smiled and said finally, what did you mean by that word?" The room was quiet in the way rooms get quiet when everyone already knows the question and has been waiting for it. I took my time. Not for drama. Because the answer deserved to be put together carefully. The honest answer, I said, is that it was not one thing. It was several things at the same time, and a full answer requires a little bit of context. Ellen Vance nodded. Humanity has been aware for 30 years, I said, not suspected, not feared, but aware, with genuine certainty, that this confrontation was coming. The Council's trajectory and our own growth made it mathematically inevitable. The founders of the Human Charter understood that, and they made a decision that I think is one of the most important decisions any group of humans ever made together. I paused. They decided not to live in fear of that inevitability. They decided instead to prepare for it as a known event, the way you prepare for a season change or a scheduled appointment. You do not panic about winter when you know winter is coming. You prepare. You build the things you need. You train the people who will be needed. You plan for every version of the scenario you can imagine, and then you plan for the ones you cannot imagine, and you keep going. The room was still. For 30 years, I continued, humanity was told in various ways that we were not ready for the galaxy. Too young. Too violent. Too unpredictable. We were told this in diplomatic language and in council statements and in the quiet condescension of every interaction where we were treated as a problem to be managed rather than a civilization to be respected. And for 30 years, we absorbed all of that, and we kept working. So when the council finally declared war, Ellen Vance said, "You were not afraid." "I was afraid," I said. I want to be clear about that, because the alternative reading, the one where I am not afraid, is not accurate and is not the point. I was afraid in that chamber the same way I have been afraid in every difficult moment of this entire period. Fear is not the absence of courage. It is the thing that courage is made out of. You cannot be brave about something that doesn't frighten you. It doesn't count. A few people in the room smiled at that. Not many. Most were still listening very carefully. What finally meant, I said, was this. For 30 years, we had been ready. And for 30 years, we had been asked, quietly and consistently, to pretend that we were not. To make ourselves smaller. To accept a position in the galaxy that did not match what we were actually capable of. To wait for permission to be taken seriously. I looked at the room. Finally was the sound of the waiting being over. It was not a challenge. It was not bravado. It was just the truth. We were ready. We had been ready for a long time. And the declaration of war was, in a specific and genuine way, a relief, because it meant we could stop pretending otherwise. Ellen Vance was quiet for a moment. And the smile, she said. The same reason, I said. You smile when something that has been coming for a long time finally arrives and you are prepared for it. It is not a cruel smile. It is the smile of a person who spent 30 years getting ready for a test and just received the exam paper. Another journalist raised a hand. A young man toward the back of the room, whose name badge said Orbital Weekly, which was a publication from one of the Outer Rim colonies. Commander Solis, he said, what do you say to the civilizations that are still outside the compact? The 6 who refused to sign. I say nothing to them today, I said. We have signed an agreement with 11 civilizations and we will honor it fully and build on it in good faith. The 6 who abstained have their own reasons, and those reasons are not going away quickly. But situations change. What looks like a firm position from the inside often looks like a temporary holding pattern from the outside, and we are patient people. Patient, he repeated, as though tasting the word. Very, I said. There was a ripple of quiet laughter in the room. The session went on for another hour. Questions about the fleet, about the Ember Line settlements, about the technology sharing timeline under the compact, about the joint diplomatic hub that was being established in the old council chamber building. I answered all of them as clearly and completely as I could. At the end, as people were gathering their things to leave, one of the alien correspondents approached me. She was from one of the 11 signatory civilizations, a Lorith journalist named Veth Sali, whose species had watched the original chamber broadcast in real time. She had been sitting at the end of the correspondent row, quiet through the whole session, taking notes by hand in a script I couldn't read. Commander Solis, she said, through her translator, I want to ask you something that is not for publication. You do not need to answer. Go ahead, I said. When you walked back into the chamber 6 months after the war began, she said, and you placed the chip on the podium, you knew that the council was already fracturing. You knew that at least 5 civilizations were ready to consider your terms. You knew this before you arrived. Yes, I said. So the compact was not improvised in that room. No, I said. It was written 4 years ago. I updated it twice during the conflict based on what we learned. But the core of it was written before the war started. Veth Sali looked at me for a moment. You planned the end of the war before the war began, she said. We planned for a range of possible ends, I said. That one was my preferred version. She nodded slowly. My civilization spent 100 years fighting the council before we agreed to membership, she said. We were exhausted. We signed because we could not continue. It was not a choice freely made. I know, I said quietly. Humanity signed from a position of strength, she said. Yes. That has never happened before, she said. In the history of this council. No species has ever negotiated entry from a position of strength. I said nothing because she was not quite finished. I think, she said carefully, that what happened here is not just the end of a conflict. I think it is the beginning of something that the galaxy does not have a name for yet. I thought about that for a moment. We might have a name for it, I said. She waited. We call it the first step, I said. Veth Sali looked at me for a long moment, and then she did something I had not seen a Lorith do before, in any of the footage or briefings or live interactions I had experienced. She smiled. The last thing I did that day, before the car came back to take me to wherever the schedule said I needed to be next, was stand for a few minutes in the formal reception hall of the government building, which had high windows and good afternoon light and very tall ceilings.